They saw the scar before they saw the man. It ran from the edge of his cheek down to his jaw, a faded memory carved into skin, and to them that was enough. The whispers started before he even reached the counter. Some chuckled. One muttered a joke under his breath. None of them asked his name. None of them noticed the way he stood. Not stiff, not broken, but with the posture of someone who had once been trained to hold the line when everyone else fell back. They didn't know he had a story. They didn't know his silence held more weight than any of their words. And they definitely didn't know what was pinned inside the folded wallet he kept in his back pocket. A single, creased photo of a ceremony no one had ever seen, where a general with trembling hands had presented him with the Medal of Honor, then saluted first. Welcome to Endless Stories, where silence speaks and dignity doesn't demand attention. It earns it. If this story moved you, subscribe now, leave a comment with the name of someone you think the world forgot to thank, and help us keep their legacy alive, one story at a time. He walked into the diner like he'd done 100 times before. Same worn boots, same steady stride, same faded green jacket with patches that had long since lost their color. But what people saw first wasn't the way he carried himself. It wasn't the quiet calm in his eyes or the faint stiffness in his step. It was the scar, a long, jagged line that ran from just under his left eye, down his cheek, and across the edge of his jawline. It didn't bleed. It didn't look angry. It simply existed, unapologetically, like a signature carved by something violent but survived. And because of that scar, they decided they knew who he was. The man behind the counter smirked. A pair of teenagers in a corner booth leaned in and whispered. A woman with too much perfume nudged her friend and said something under her breath. He said nothing, just walked up to the counter, nodded once at the waitress, and asked for coffee.
No cream, no sugar.
Just heat and quiet. She brought it without asking questions. Her name was Carla, and she'd been working that counter since before the wallpaper began to peel. She didn't flinch when he sat, didn't look away when she saw the scar. She just placed the cup gently in front of him and said, "Haven't seen you in a while. You good?" He nodded, took a sip, let the silence settle like dust. The diner was small, the kind where regulars sat in the same seats every day and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked since the 90s. But today it buzzed. Not with music, with noise. The kind of noise that came from judgment dressed in laughter, from stories people made up in the absence of truth. Someone said, just loud enough to carry, "Bet he got that scar in prison." Another voice chimed in, "Nah, I heard it was a knife fight." He kept sipping. Carla looked at him, waiting to see if he'd respond. He didn't. He never did. But this time, she saw something behind his stillness. Not anger, but a heaviness. Not because of the words, because of how long he'd been carrying them. Then the door opened. A man in uniform stepped in. Not just any uniform. Navy dress blues, clean, decorated. Sharp creases and polished shoes that hadn't seen a drop of dust. He looked around the room once, scanned every face, and then locked eyes with the man at the counter. And then he saluted, full, formal, hand to brow.
No hesitation.
No performance. The room went quiet. One of the teenagers dropped his fork. The woman with too much perfume straightened in her seat. The man behind the counter took an instinctive step back. And still, the man with the scar said nothing. He simply stood, turned, and returned the salute. The man in uniform approached, leaned in, and said something no one else could hear. The scarred man nodded once, just once, then sat back down and returned to his coffee. The officer left, and no one in that room ever looked at the scar the same way again. The rain started falling hard just after dusk. Not the soft kind that kissed windows, but the kind that hammered pavement and made the world feel smaller, faster. The man with the scar stood at the edge of the bus stop, collar turned up, hands in his coat pockets, waiting with the same stillness he always carried. But tonight, something felt off. Not in the weather, in the air, in the way the streetlight flickered, in the way the kid standing 10 feet from him kept glancing sideways. He was maybe 19, hoodie soaked through, fist stuffed deep into the kangaroo pouch like he was hiding something or holding something. His eyes were restless, not scared, wired, tracking cars, watching every movement like a switch ready to flip. Carver saw it right away. He'd seen it before, in cities where you didn't ask names, in alleys where you didn't step too far in young soldiers who hadn't fired yet but were shaking from what they thought they might do. The kid didn't speak, but his tension screamed. A bus turned the corner up the block. The kid shifted his weight. That's when Carver saw the bulge under the hoodie. Gun. Small. Maybe a .22 or a Glock. Pressed close to the ribs, poorly hidden. The kid's chest heaved once. And then he turned toward the diner. The same diner Carver had left an hour ago. His eyes locked forward. Focused. Like he had already made up his mind. Carver stepped forward. Calm. Like someone walking into a memory he'd already survived. Don't, he said. The kid froze mid-step. You don't know me, the boy snapped. I don't need to, Carver replied. But I know that walk. And I know what's gonna happen if you take one more step in that direction. The boy's face twisted. They laughed at my mom. They laughed at her scars. I asked them to stop. They didn't. So I'm gonna make them. The bus kept approaching. Carver moved between the boy and the diner without raising his voice. You think you're protecting her, but she doesn't need revenge. She needs you to come home alive. The kid looked like he might cry. Or shoot. Or both. Rain pounded harder. Carver slowly pulled out his wallet, the same one with the photo. He opened it. Held it out. This is what they gave me after they sent me home full of metal and missing friends, he said. This little square. They saluted me, gave me words, but none of it brought back what I lost. The boy didn't take the photo, but he looked, really looked. Carver said, you don't need a medal to prove you're strong. You need to survive the story you're still writing. The kid's hand trembled. His eyes darted to the diner, then to the gun, then to Carver, and then he broke, dropped to his knees. The gun clattered onto the wet sidewalk. The bus pulled up and stopped. Carver didn't touch him, just stood there, silent, like a guard between two versions of what could have happened. The kid looked up. How'd you know? Carver's voice was barely a whisper. Because once, someone stopped me too. The next morning, there was no headline, no coverage, no photo of the scarred man standing in the rain, disarming a boy with nothing but his voice and a decades-old photo. No cameras had been rolling. No diner staff had even realized what almost happened right outside their door. Life went on. Eggs were flipped. Coffee was poured. Jokes were cracked. The same people who once whispered about the scar now nodded at him without quite knowing why. But someone had seen. Someone who hadn't stepped outside but had been watching, not through a window, but through the grainy footage of an old corner security camera that caught just enough of the boy's shape, just enough of the angle of Carver's back to raise questions. The footage had landed on a desk at the sheriff's office around 2 a.m. flagged by an automated alert. Possible weapon, but no shots were fired. No victims. No call placed. Just stillness. The sheriff stared at the video on loop, paused on the frame where the boy knelt, arms limp, and the older man stood like a wall behind him.
No ball. No weapon.
No fear. He hit pause, rewound, froze it again, then picked up the phone. Get me someone who knows who this man is. By noon, 2 plainclothes officers walked into the diner. Carla saw them before they spoke, felt the shift in their gait. Lawmen didn't always wear uniforms, but they always wore purpose. And these 2 had it in spades. They approached the counter, didn't sit. Ma'am, one said, we're looking for a man. Scar down the left cheek. Quiet. Carries a black wallet. Carla didn't flinch. You with the press? No, ma'am, the younger one said. Sheriff's office. She raised an eyebrow. He in trouble? No, the older officer said. We think he stopped something. Before it happened. That's when Carla smiled. Not because she was surprised, but because the world was finally catching up. He didn't do it for recognition, she said. He never does. We just want to talk, the younger man said. He won't, she replied, unless you ask the right way. The officers left a card. Carver never called. Instead, 3 nights later, the sheriff himself pulled up in an unmarked car and waited outside the diner until closing. Carver emerged, same jacket, same steady walk. He looked at the man leaning on the hood and stopped a few feet away. "You're not here to arrest me," Carver said.
No.
"You're not here to thank me either." The sheriff nodded slowly.
No.
"I'm here because that kid you stopped," he had a list in his pocket. Names. 3 of them. All people inside that diner. "If you hadn't said what you said." Carver waited. The sheriff's voice dropped. "We'd be burying someone." Still, Carver said nothing. The sheriff pulled out his wallet. Not to flash a badge, but to pull out a photograph. Not of a suspect, of a man in uniform. "My brother," he said. "I never got to stop him." The 2 men stood there, under a humming streetlight, saying nothing for a long moment. 2 stories. One quiet understanding. And that story, still, never made the news. It arrived folded into thirds, tucked inside an envelope that had no return address. The stamp was standard. The handwriting, shaky, uneven, almost unsure. Looked like someone had written it not out of routine, but out of necessity. Carver found it on the floor just inside his apartment door, not dropped by the postman, but slid beneath the frame by hand. Whoever delivered it wanted no acknowledgement, only for it to be found. He stared at it for a moment, thumb resting on the flap, then slowly broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of yellowing lined paper.
No greeting.
No date, just a message written with pauses, hesitation marks where the pen had hovered. "I saw your face once years ago. I didn't know your name, just the scar. I was stationed at Forward Operating Base Cutter, 91. A convoy got hit on a ridge. We were the 2nd response unit. What we found wasn't in the report. 5 men alive, 6 burned. 1 man carrying another on his back, both shot. That was you, wasn't it?" Carver froze. The penmanship trembled, but the details were too precise to be a guess. The letter continued. "They told us not to mention it. Something about ongoing operations and sensitive status. We never knew why you weren't decorated properly. Only that when the dust settled, your name vanished.
No citation.
No follow-up. We just assumed you hadn't made it." Carver exhaled slowly. "I tried to write this letter 100 times, but it never felt like my place. Until last week, when my son came home from school and told me about the scarred man who stopped a shooting with his words. I asked him where he heard that. He said his friends saw it. Saw you." There was a space, an emotional breath between paragraphs. "I don't know if this will reach you. I don't even know if you'll read it. But if you do, know this, you were never invisible. Not to all of us. No name, no address, just a final line. Thank you for surviving." Carver sat down. The letter trembled in his fingers. Not from age, not from emotion, but from the realization that something he had buried beneath years of silence was still alive in someone else's memory. The firefight on the ridge. The man he carried. The order to keep quiet afterward. The medal that came years too late and with no explanation. All of it he had long accepted as erased. But someone else remembered. That night he didn't turn on the lights. Just sat at the table, letter in hand, the photo still in his wallet, the medal still in its box, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe stories didn't need headlines to last. They just needed someone who couldn't forget. It was supposed to be a quiet visit. Early morning, before the dew lifted, before the town stirred. Carver didn't like crowds, and cemeteries were never meant to be loud. He walked with the quiet steps of a man who remembered where every crack in the path led, where the names were carved, even the ones no one visited anymore. His destination wasn't marked by flowers or flags, just a stone weathered by time, initials faint, barely visible unless the light hit just right. Mitchell. The name was enough. He stood for a long time, saying nothing, the folded flag in his hand. Not to place, but to hold. A symbol, a vow, maybe even a weight he hadn't set down yet. Then he heard it, sniffling, not nearby, off to the left, 2 rows over, behind the tall hedges near the back fence. He didn't move immediately, let the sound repeat, waited for the wind to tell him if it was grief or something else. Then he stepped quietly toward it. There, under a large oak tree that shaded 3 graves in a crooked line, sat a boy, no older than 11. Backpack next to him, knees tucked to chest, dirty sneakers and a crumpled note in his hand. The boy didn't notice Carver at first, didn't look up until the shadow covered his lap. He startled, not afraid, just surprised. Carver didn't speak, just gave a small nod, letting the boy decide if silence would stay or not. The boy blinked, sniffled again, then finally mumbled, "He was supposed to be here today." Carver's eyes drifted to the gravestone. The name wasn't military.
No flags. No rank.
Just a date, and a space beside it, empty. Who was he? Carver asked gently. "My dad," the boy said. "He used to bring me here," said this was the only place he could talk out loud and no one would interrupt. Carver slowly sat on the edge of the next stone. Not imposing, just present. The boy unfolded the paper. "I wrote something for him, but now I feel dumb. He's not even here." Carver looked at him for a long time, then said, "Sometimes the people who aren't here better than the ones who are." The boy considered that, then asked, "Did you lose someone too?" Carver nodded. "Many. Were they soldiers?" Carver hesitated. Some. Some were just people who stood up when it mattered." The boy folded the letter again. "I wish someone stood up for my dad. He always stood up for other people. But when he needed help," his voice trailed. Carver reached into his coat and pulled out something small. A patch. Not military. Not official. Just cloth, dark green with white stitching. Still standing. He handed it to the boy. "What is it?" the boy asked. Carver said, "It's a reminder that standing doesn't mean loud, doesn't mean perfect. It just means not walking away when someone needs you." The boy looked down at it, fingers tracing the edges. And then, for the first time since he arrived, he smiled. It was small, but real. They sat in silence for a while. 2 strangers, connected not by blood or duty, but by something heavier, memory, and the quiet promise that no one's strength or pain should ever be buried without someone to carry it forward. He had noticed him before. Not clearly, not enough to call it suspicion, but enough for instinct to whisper. In the diner, at the cemetery, even across the street from the courthouse on that heavy day when the Pentagon man had stepped in. Always sitting back, always wearing the same weathered hat, always gone before Carver could get close enough to ask. But this time was different. It was late, not quite night, but past the hour when most folks had gone home. Carver had stopped by the community center for veterans, not to attend anything, just to leave a donation envelope like he always did. Quietly, anonymously, but when he stepped out into the cool air, he saw the man again, sitting on the bench across the street. Same posture, same silence, except this time he didn't leave. Carver crossed slowly, boots clicking against pavement. The man didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked up and nodded once, as if to say, "I've been waiting." He was older, maybe late 70s, wore an old navy ball cap, sweat-stained and sun-faded. His jacket was zipped up high, collar turned. And his eyes, they held something Carver recognized too well, burden. "You've been watching," Carver said. The man nodded again. "Not in the way you think." "Then in what way?" The man gestured to the empty space beside him. Carver sat. "I was there," the man said quietly. "Cutter Ridge, 91. I was the one who gave the order to silence the report." Carver didn't speak, didn't even blink. He'd waited years for that sentence. Just never thought it would come from a bench outside a rec center, beneath a broken street lamp, from a man who looked like he hadn't slept in decades. "I was scared," the man continued, "not of the truth, of what it would cost. We lost 3 good men in that op. 1 friendly fire, 1 communications collapse, 1 classified loss we were never allowed to explain. I signed the papers, buried the names. He reached into his coat, pulled out a single dog tag. Not his. Mitchell's, he said. It never made it back into the system. I've kept it for 30 years. He handed it to Carver. No drama.
No apology.
Just the weight of something that had been held too long. Carver took it, ran his thumb over the etched name, and for the first time in a very long time, something in his chest let go. They sat in silence. Then Carver asked, "Why now?" The man looked at him with tired eyes. "Because I saw what you've done, how you carry it, how you didn't let bitterness speak louder than honor. I couldn't go without knowing you had it, and I couldn't let him be forgotten." Carver nodded. The streetlight above them flickered once, then steadied. He slipped the tag into his pocket, stood, and said the only words that felt right. "Thank you for remembering." There were no invitations.
No posters.
No press release. Just a short message sent through a Veterans Network forum, and signed, "Barely Noticed. If you've ever served and you remember Cutter Ridge, come to the park Sunday, 0900. That's all. By Friday night, barely a dozen responses. Some with cryptic, "I remember" replies. Some just thumbs up. Most ignored it. After all, it had been over 30 years. Cutter Ridge was a ghost, buried in red tape, unofficial reports, and soldiers who'd been told to forget. But on Sunday morning at exactly 8:59, the old park near the courthouse began to fill. They didn't march in. They didn't wear full dress. They came as they were: jeans, jackets, boots, worn ball caps, hands calloused from life after the uniform. Carver arrived quietly, as always, his steps slower now, but steady. In his jacket pocket, Mitchell's dog tag. In his hand, a folded note with 6 names. His, Mitchell's. And for others who never made it back but also never made it into the record. At the center of the park stood nothing but an empty podium and a wooden bench. On the bench, a single folded flag and a brass plate. No title.
No rank.
Just one line: "To those who served when no one was watching." Carver didn't ask who placed it. Didn't need to, because sitting beneath the nearest tree was the man from the bench, the former officer. Watching quietly, as one by one, men and women gathered around the bench, hands in pockets, some wiping eyes they didn't realize had teared. There was no national anthem.
No speaker.
But suddenly, without cue, the crowd parted. A teenage boy, no older than 16, stepped forward. Hair combed, shirt tucked, shaking slightly as he pulled out a crumpled letter. "My name is Kyle," he said, voice barely above wind. "I'm not a soldier, but I wouldn't be here if one hadn't stopped me." Eyes turned. Carver froze. "I was angry, lost, and someone with a scar and a story I didn't deserve stopped me before I did something I couldn't take back." He didn't yell. He didn't preach. He just showed me what real courage looks like. The boy paused, swallowed hard. "I know I don't belong here, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you." He stepped back, and in that breath of stillness, Carver moved forward. He didn't take the podium. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid Mitchell's tag on the folded flag, then turned to the crowd and said, "Sometimes the only ceremony you need is each other." That was it. And somehow it was everything. A low ripple of salutes followed. Not in sync, not by rank, but honest. The kind of tribute that doesn't need medals, just memory. It arrived by certified mail. No knock on the door. No phone call ahead. Just a plain envelope slid into his mailbox, stamped with a federal seal he hadn't seen in decades. The return address, Department of Defense, Archives Division. Carver stared at it for a full minute before touching it, as if it might vanish if he blinked too hard. He brought it inside, sat at the same table where his coffee had gone cold so many times before, and slowly opened it. Inside were 3 things. First, a letter, typed, formal, Mr. David Carver. Following a recent review triggered by a declassification request, your name and service have been re-entered into the federal record, with citations for actions during the Cutter Ridge incident of March 1991. This update has been made permanent and public. All previously redacted material will now be visible through appropriate channels. We thank you for your patience and for your service.
No signature.
Just initials, GTH. Carver exhaled, slowly, as if the breath he was holding had lasted 30 years. Second, a metal citation, official, stamped, words he had never thought he'd read in print. For acts of extraordinary valor and selfless leadership under extreme hostile fire during an unacknowledged operation, where Sergeant David L. Carver carried out life-saving actions that directly resulted in the survival of 5 American personnel, while wounded and outnumbered. And then the third item, a copy of the sealed after-action report. Once classified, above top secret. Now in his hands. The full truth, names, movements, orders, failures, and his name no longer erased. He read it slowly, and as he did, a tear, singular, unannounced, welled and dropped to the paper. Not for himself, but for Mitchell, for those names on the wall, for every man and woman who had ever been told you were never here. He folded the papers, placed them into the drawer where the photo lived. And for the first time, the drawer didn't feel like a grave, felt like a record. It started with a photograph. Not the one in Carver's wallet, that one stayed exactly where it had always been. This was different. A snapshot, taken without his knowledge, during the park ceremony. Someone in the crowd had caught it. Carver standing beside the folded flag, hand resting gently on Mitchell's tag, head slightly bowed. The boy Kyle looking on in silent awe just a few feet behind him. The photo made its way online. No name.
No caption.
Just the image. It went viral in silence, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. There was something in the way the old man stood. Something in the scar, in the posture, in the humility. It spoke louder than headlines ever could. And then the comments began. He stopped my cousin from doing something stupid. Never got the chance to say thank you. I think I served under him once. He never talked much. But when he did, everyone listened. My dad always said the best soldiers don't wear medals on their chest. They carry them in their silence. I think this is who he meant. No one tagged him. No one needed to, because by then, the story had already started telling itself. The local high school requested permission to frame the photo in the main hallway. A veterans center in another state printed the image in their annual report, simply titled, Legacy. And the Department of Defense? They quietly added the Cutter Ridge report to their public archives. No edits.
No redactions.
Just truth at last. Carver never commented, never confirmed, never corrected. He didn't need to, because stories like his, once heard, don't need to be repeated, they echo. And somewhere across small towns and big cities, in schools, in barracks, in homes with folded flags on fireplace mantles, people began to understand that not all heroes need to speak. Some just need to be seen. And now, finally, he had been. Thank you for staying until the end of David Carver's journey. A man whose silence spoke louder than medals, whose scar told a story no one expected, and whose presence became a mirror for honor long overlooked. If this story moved you, if you know someone whose strength was never put in a headline, share their name in the comments. Help us give voice to the quiet heroes, one story at a time. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where real courage never fades. It echoes. Backhand index pointing right, Endless Stories. Because some stories refuse to fade.